Hi everyone, this is our week 2 class meeting, and pardon me if I sound a bit nasally. I'm having a lot of allergies today, so I'm pretty stuffed up, so sorry about that. It looked like we didn't have anybody able to make it to class tonight, so I wanted to go ahead and record a quick presentation for you to cover this week's materials. As far as announcements for the course, I don't have any major announcements. Everything is pretty much on track. I have given feedback on your week 1 projects as well as the week 2 exploration. Explorations looked good. There was a few points that I wanted to clarify, and I'll touch on some of those as we go along because I have included some of your movie posters in the presentation. Other announcements. I will be out of the office this Friday, so I won't be available via phone. I hopefully will check my email periodically as I'm able, and unfortunately, so I won't be in the Friday blend for those of you who are on campus. And I think that is all as far as our announcements go. So, if you do have any questions, please get in touch. You can shoot me an email or message me on FSO, are usually the quickest ways to reach me, and I will hopefully get back to you. So this week we're talking about color and a variety of factors related to color. Color is one of the aspects of color that we're going to examine is its use for branding, and that's going to play a part in your mood board activities. But there's really basically two aspects of this that I'm going to explore, but it's all connected, and that's use of color for branding, and then use of color within imagery. And they're essentially the same. They follow the same rules, but the uses are a little bit different, so I'll touch on both of those instances as we go. Because if you think about your mood board activity, you are establishing your personal brand, but then in the end you're going to create an image. So the colors you pick for your brand might not be the dominant colors in your image, but will appear with logos or text or what have you to represent the recognizable part of your brand. So it's a little bit of a dichotomy there. But think about branding for a minute, and some of the brands that you know. They're really iconic brands. For example, Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. They're really closely tied to these logos, and the logos rely heavily on recognizable colors. The green of the Starbucks logo and the sort of magenta, pink, and red of Dunkin' Donuts. And watch what happens when we reverse those. This is something I saw online, and it was really striking because we become so used to those recognizable colors, the recognizable identities of these brands, that when it's changed, it feels funny, doesn't it? Just looking at that. Another example, FedEx and UPS, really recognizable color schemes. Reverse those, and it's like it takes away their identity, really. So that's how ingrained color is in branding, and I'll get more into this later on in this presentation. But you see how important this is. And so this week we're going to cover color, the meanings of individual colors, which is color psychology, as well as the interaction of colors, how you can blend, not necessarily blend, but pair colors together to create a specific visual impression and energy within your designs and within images. So we'll start with talking about color psychology briefly. Color psychology is, as you would expect, is the psychology, the mental perceptual reactions to color. Remember that our definition of aesthetics is our perceptual reactions to media elements, and color is one of those elements. So we're talking about our reactions to specific colors or color combinations. A lot of this is learned. So a lot of this comes from our culture. what we grow up with, what we are exposed to on a day-to-day basis, and things that we come to expect to symbolize certain things. What has meaning to us in our culture may be very different to someone from a very different culture. If you think about, for example, the color red, we often see that as a warning sign, and in fact, if you think about these colors from our traffic signals, these become really ingrained in us. Stop and go. Green means stop, red means go. Even before we can drive, there's a children's game, I don't know if people still play it, called Red Light, Green Light, where you can move when they say green light, and then you have to stop moving when they say red light and try to reach a certain point before everybody else. But that teaches us those meanings of these colors from a very early age, so they become very recognizable, right? What else do we associate with the colors red and green? And this is coming up on this time of year, and that's the Christmas holiday, right? Um, it's a major part of our culture in America. Even if you don't celebrate the holiday, you're still surrounded by it because it's in our stores and it's on the commercials and on the decorations, even on our city streets. So we come to recognize the color combination red and green as sort of the iconic color scheme of the Christmas holiday. And these things become a part of us. They become really deeply ingrained. This is one example. Other examples might be the white of the wedding dress, that is always a symbol of purity, or black in our culture is what we wear for mourning. If there's a funeral, we wear black traditionally. At the same time, black can be a symbol of elegance. You think about black tie events and so forth. What are some others? And think about language also. The color green. We use green initiatives to talk about environmentally friendly efforts, and sometimes green is used to refer to money as well. So, and the color blue. If you're feeling blue, it means you're down. So these are color meanings that become really deeply ingrained within us. Also, blue is often a symbol of authority, because think about the police uniforms are often blue, and some branches of the military as well. So that's the cultural aspect of the psychology of color. Some of it is also instinctual, but it's very small percentage of the color psychology. Red is actually one of the colors that has a very instinctual effect on us. It's actually in your textbook readings this week, they talk about the red effect. And what they've found in various situations is that red, the presence of the color of red in your environment, has a way of diminishing your rational mental abilities to a very tiny degree. And what is speculated is, or believed is, that because red is the color of our blood, usually in nature, if you see that, it means there's been something's been harmed, there's injury, there's danger, and so we have that fight or flight reaction, that survival mechanism. And so carried through to modern day, even though we don't have the impulse to run, it's still our little reptile brains, our brainstem is still trying to warn us. So what effect that has had is that, say, if there is a sporting event and one team is wearing mostly red uniforms, the other team will tend to lose. Statistically, more likely to lose. And it's a very small effect, but it is a measurable effect that this happens. And it's also been seen in video games like Halo, where there's the red team versus the blue team. So it gives them the tiniest of advantages. Also, as is covered in your textbook readings, Target stores have red branding. So there's red everywhere in the store. And they blame this for the phenomenon where you go into Target to buy, say, a pack of toilet paper and come out with a few $100s worth of clothes and home decor and everything else because your impulse control is diminished slightly because of the red. So it's an interesting phenomenon that that we see. Also green, as it happens, the other color I have on the screen, because it is so often tied to plant life and very verdant life, it actually has a calming effect on us. It's called the biophilia effect, that if we are in an environment that has plants, it tends to have diminish our stress levels. So that green also has that effect. A lot of times when you're talking about color psychology, you'll see this sort of information where they'll have it very codified, as if these colors mean these specific things, almost like a sort of astrological chart of colors. And you can use these as a reference, but I wouldn't recommend depending on these as definitive associations for these colors, because it's not always the case. You have to really look at the context as well. Yes, green is often peaceful and a symbol of growth, but can also indicate sickness or illness as well. And purple is described as a creative color. It historically was a royal color, probably because the purple dye was difficult to make, and so it was very rare, and so it was considered a symbol of wealth. And a lot of times I see the color purple used for things that are meant to be really playful or quirky or a little bit off center in some way. I would say that using primary colors like blue, red, yellow tend to be a little more business-like, so they're a little less quirky than, say, purple or pink or some other secondary colors, so that you will more often see those used by more serious businesses, especially blue. As if you look at the list of logos here, you see Dell, J.P. Morgan, Lowe's, that's AT&T, GE. A lot of these are pretty straight-laced businesses. We do have Oreo in there, which is a little more fun, but for the most part, these are more like financial businesses or business world related businesses. Similar with that is red, a little bit less so because red is a warm color and so it's more energetic and a little bit more upbeat. We still have Kmart, Exxon, Virgin, Canon, and some of these others, Avis. But then you start seeing some of the more fun logos as well. Coca-Cola, looks like the Rolling Stones, and so forth. But you still see predominantly more serious businesses, and yellow is a similar case. So the farther you deviate from the primary colors, usually the more you start seeing some of these a little less serious, a little more fun or unusual brands. Not always the case, of course. There's going to be exceptions, but you can see that trend. So my recommendation is, and I'll get into more of the mood board activity later, but is to use this as sort of a starting point. but don't take it as written in stone rules when you see this sort of uh, defined associations. Just a couple of examples that I wanted to pull out. Intel, of course, is the manufacturer of computer components, the processors. Everybody knows the Intel Inside slogan. And they use that blue, which is the more formal and authoritarian looking color, which would suit a brand in their line of work. And then BP, and I think this one's interesting because BP is British Petroleum. It's an oil company, and we know their gas stations franchises. And notice that they're using green as their color. It's you might recognize this as an analogous color scheme with green and yellow, green and yellow, and that flower design. So what does that call to mind? It's really leveraging that idea of green being healthy, being environmentally friendly, and so forth. So they're really playing that to their advantage for the purpose of public relations in their branding, giving that public image of a company that cares about the environment, even though petroleum companies are often seen as one of the more damaging industries for the environment. Going back to that red effect, what do we think of when we think of color red? Of course, I touched on the idea of it being danger or warning. Also think about Valentine's Day. What do we see? A lot of red, but in the context of passion and strong emotion, love and romantic love. So it also has that connection. And perhaps because when we are feeling romantically inclined, and you tend to flush, and our skin becomes, very, we blush, so it gets that rosy quality, and so you also have that association. And so this particular ad uses that idea, and notice that even the verbal component, the rekindle the flame of desire, goes right along with the red color that predominates this design. And the focus in this case is on the appearance of the car rather than pointing out how fuel efficient it is or any specs on the engine. It's all about the physical, the sensory experience. So those factors all go together. It creates a unified experience, focusing on that flame of desire idea. Within imagery, and you see this especially in movie posters, as we looked at, also in scenes in films and TV as well, color can be used to influence our mood in a similar way to how you see musical scores used. So a musical score will often kind of underscore the mood, the emotion that's happening on the screen. Think about a horror film or an action film. As the action builds, the music starts kind of low and then builds up to this crescendo just as the action comes to a climax. Color is used in a similar way, but it's visual rather than auditory. So the colors that we see on the screen are carefully selected to support the mood that filmmaker or that designer is trying to convey to you. So take a look at this image. This is an ad that I've used for a long time in the class when I had analysis activities, but now it's just going to be a really useful example. But notice the use of color. This would be a complementary color scheme, right? Actually split complementary with the green and blue and orange. But notice what the colors are associated with also. The young man is hiding beneath the stairs, and he's associated with this "you cannot hide it" slogan that's kind of menacing. We see this threatening figure, and his very fearful expression and tense body language is tied to this blue, this pale blue, which is a cool color and so is a more subdued appearance. So those two factors, the color as well as his expressions, go together to create that more depressed feel towards this young man. Whereas the warm color, which is more action oriented, is above the stairs and it's connected with this person we don't see. We only see the shadow, but this is an invader, someone who's coming after them. It's more of a threatening figure, and so has that more active color association. Another example here, the warm colors connected with Ryan Reynolds, who has the very upbeat expression, is obviously having a pretty good time, as opposed to Jason Bateman at the top, who's struggling with these children. He's got this very troubled look and has the blue, again associated with the more subdued, the more low moods, whereas warm colors build moods. This is always something that is carefully selected. I think I said last week, nothing is left to chance. Every detail of the media you consume has been decided upon very carefully. This infographic that I have here is a summary of the use of color in the entire series Breaking Bad, so all 5 seasons. And what this person has done is gone through in each episode, recorded the colors associated with each character in each scene in each episode of the series, and they've used the legend to kind of put markers for different events. And if you look at this quote in the lower right, it's very telling. It's by Vince Gilligan, who's the creator of this show. He says, "I want to do the color timing for each of these episodes where you sit with the colorist and make sure that the colors, each individual scene is just the way you want it. So you know this is done purposely based on what he says there." So take a look at Jesse Pinkman. And if you're familiar with the show, you know Jesse is a young man. He's very volatile emotionally. He usually runs off at the mouth and has, curses pretty much constantly, and has a really short temper. So thinking of that personality, what colors would you expect to see? Probably the more energetic, warm colors, right? Fiery colors. So what do we see? A lot of red, a lot of yellow throughout. And this tends to change as the series goes on, because if you've seen the show, Jesse undergoes a lot of character development, and really his personality changes as the series progresses. So we have all these warm colors, really vibrant warm colors. And this might be his shirt he's wearing, a hat he's wearing, the room he's in the scene, the car he's driving, and what have you. But notice a few key events right here, where it's marker number 3 at the beginning of season 2. It goes red for a good while, and then suddenly it's black. Like the color is gone for a good long while. What happens at that point is he's abducted by Tuco, and Tuco is sort of a drug boss in the show. He's a really dangerous person, and pretty scary guy. So he's abducted by Tuco at that point. And I can't remember, I have watched the show, but I can't remember now what was going on, if he was locked in a dark room, stuck in a car trunk or whatever, but the colors associated with him for that period became black. It was just dark. So it went right along with the action. Apparently he recovers about mid-season, and it goes on, and then right about marker number 5, you see another big flare-up of that red, followed by a kind of gray-green. So it's very little color, and then it goes to black and white and gray. So again, the color goes out, and what happens there, I should probably say spoiler alert, because these are going to be some spoilers if you haven't seen the show. Jane, his girlfriend, dies at that point. So again, the color just kind of leaves his life, and then it goes to black at the point he goes into rehab. So he's kind of hitting rock bottom in his life right at that point. And things are pretty rough for a while for him. So that really shows how that color has been planned throughout the entire season. So anytime you see a show or a movie or a commercial, pay attention to the colors and how they're being used, because that's all been planned. Take a look, for example, at The Matrix. And hopefully you've seen The Matrix. If not, there's going to be some spoilers here as well. But when it first starts off, everything has this odd, sort of unnatural looking tint to it. It's a little green, so it looks kind of otherworldly. It's not enough to where it is surreal, but it just doesn't look right. And you notice this, but you don't really know why that is the case. And as it turns out, everything that's happening is a computer simulation. It's in a virtual reality world that everyone thinks is reality. Only once they get out of that, of the matrix, as it's called, then you see natural color return, and warm colors return, natural looking skin tones, and it feels alive and it feels vital. So there's that visual cue that we're going from this world that's not quite right, there's something not quite right here, to quote reality of the movie. So you see the difference there. It's that, and this actually going back to the color green, in this case being sort of a visual cue of unhealthiness. In this case, think about if you're feeling queasy, you get a little green. So that's sort of what they're leveraging there to give that impression. And then there's a third environment when they leave the safety of their homes outside of the matrix and go out into the world that's controlled by these machines and robots. Everything has this sort of grayish blue cast to it, so it feels cold and it feels uninviting, and it's meant to be that way because now they're in the machine's territory and there is no life out there. So it feels very isolating, right? Very cold and unfeeling. This is one I would have had gotten some input on from the class, just to get an idea of what I'm talking about. But you could see in this ad, the theme is out of the hospital doesn't mean you're out of the woods. With out of the woods meaning you're not out of the woods yet, you're not out of danger yet. So apparently this gentleman has been in the hospital recently. He's back home now, but not quite out of danger. And they took this out of the woods saying literally and put these dead, ghostly looking trees around him as a visual metaphor, right, of that story, visual story. And notice how they've used color, though. The house, you're in a living room, which, as the name says, it's a place where you live, where life happens. There's a lot of warm colors in the leather of the couch, even the carpet, the wood, and in the kitchen back here we see a lot of yellows, a lot of oranges and reds, except all around him. There it's that pale ghostly blue. So, and it's it looks like the light coming from a TV set, but still it gives him that unhealthy pale looking pallor. So that was kind of an overview of what color psychology deals with. It's how both the symbolic and cultural meanings of colors, but also how colors can affect our moods based on the cool colors versus the warm colors, and just the visual impression that they create. And again, these are a couple that I would have asked for input from the class, but notice in this case, this is actually a fake movie poster that was used in the movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which is one of my favorites. But because one of the characters is a movie star, and this is some of his films. Notice though how color is used here. Where does your eye go? Almost immediately. It probably goes to that orange, that explosion, because it stands out. It breaks the pattern, so our eye is drawn to that spot. And orange is high contrast with blue. It's complementary, right? So they've used those complementary colors in this case to create a focal point, and also to add that sense of action. If it was all blue, it would be very subdued. But throwing that splash of contrasting orange in there adds that sense of activity and action. In contrast to that is this poster, another one of Lucas Lee's fictional movies. And so now you see the colors don't contrast that strongly. They're actually fairly similar. There's a variety of colors, but they're pretty harmonious. And that's meant in this case to create that softer feel, that less jarring color contrast, because this is more of a romantic film with the tagline "Kiss Me, I'm Dying," which is pretty ridiculous. And the last one of the Lucas Lee film posters. It looks like a spoof on some of the more dramatic suspense films we might see, and makes use of that achromatic color palette, so it's colorless. Black and white are considered values, meaning the lightness or darkness, but they're not considered colors in formal color theory. They are the absence of color, so achromatic. But you do have this splash of red, and that's called an accent color when it's used to a limited extent like that. And so by throwing an accent in there, it helps to draw your attention, similar to how we saw with the orange explosion on the other poster. Draws your eye to that location, so it makes this movie title stand out. That becomes our focus along with the face, and also gives it an extra sense of drama, because that's red, right? It's that danger, the warning sign. So now we've got this very dark, kind of gritty looking scene with that splash of red giving us that extra hint of tension and danger. So that's kind of a quick look at some of the themes we're going to look at. And this is all based on the color wheel. If you've ever taken an art class, you've probably seen the color wheel. The color wheel is arranged based on our how we perceive light and color. So we have the rods and cones in our eyes, and I believe it's the cones that pick up color. And the different cones detect different wavelengths of light, so they perceive different colors. But there's color conflicts. This is not something you need to remember, but just to give a little bit of background. It's almost like a switch. It can either detect this color or this, but has trouble detecting them at the same time. And so what they've done with the color wheel is paired those conflicting colors so that they're opposites, and that becomes our complementary colors, because when those are together, they're competing with each other for our perception, and it creates that sort of vibration, that a little bit of a jarring feel, especially when they're really saturated colors. Those that are more similar are close together, so it creates the spectrum that we're familiar with. It's divided into warm versus cool colors, which I've referenced a few times. Warm colors are those that we might associate with fire, with warmth, heat. So yellows, orange, reds, yellow, orange, and red, orange, and those the in-between colors. And then cool colors are those that we think of more, call to mind ideas of ice or water and just coldness. So these are the blues, violets, most greens, until you start getting into the yellow green. But so those that are on more of the cool side, and around to magenta. So it starts slowly fading into the warm colors and vice versa. Um, Warm colors give a sense of action and excitement, so they have more energy. Um, Visually speaking, they tend to appear to pop forward towards the viewer, whereas cool colors have a little bit more subdued feeling, more calm moods, and recede more into the background. Especially when they're paired together, the cool color will tend to drop into the background while the warm color takes more of the foreground. A little bit more terminology. A hue, H-U-E, is a pure color. So if you hear me say orange hue, that means a pure color of orange. It could be red orange, it could be yellow orange, or any of the other colors on the color wheel, but it's the pure basic color. Then if you darken that, say if you're mixing paints, you would add black paint, you create a shade. So a shade is a darker version of the color. And a tint is a lighter version. So that would be, if you're mixing paint, you'd mix white paint to make it lighter. And that's, again, value, the relative lightness and darkness. So shades are the darker values, tints are the lighter values. But they're all the same color. So these would all be considered yellow, but this is the shade of yellow, this is a tint of yellow. So with those factors in mind, thinking about how warm and cool colors interact, think about how those opposing colors affect our vision, then you can start thinking about how you can pair colors, how you can pick different colors to create specific visual impressions or energies. The most basic color relationship is monochromatic, and that means you're just using a single color. And it might be various tints and shades of that color, but it's still only that color. This is a painting by Pablo Picasso, and it is called Blue Nude appropriately, and it is monochromatic. It only uses tints and shades of blue. But you can see how that still allows us to have a sense of form. You can see the highlights as well as the shadows, so you get a sense of contours without needing any other colors to be added. But it's kind of subdued. There's not a lot of contrast, so there's not a lot of energy. And some of the more modern examples of this from the exploration was the Heat movie poster, and it uses almost sort of a blue-violet color throughout. And notice it does have that accent of red to draw attention to the movie title, but other than that, it has that cool blue tint, or shade rather. And maybe in this case that gives a sense of like a nighttime scene, something where it's there's sort of a sense of mystery, and this is a crime drama, so that might be very suitable. And the Hereafter movie poster also uses monochromatic blues, and you see how in that case it's a more calm feel. It sort of feels cool, and associated with the imagery of the clouds and everything, you can kind of get a feel of the cool air. And this looks like a story of the afterlife, the hereafter, so it gives that whole visual impression of being kind of in that world. Now compare these to the monochromatic warm colors. There's a very different energy now, right? cool colors are more subdued. Warm colors now have more fire, so to speak. There's that sense of action and energy. In both of these cases, and these almost have the same color scheme, in both of these cases they've used a lot of shadow, so a lot of darker, like black or even dark shades of this yellow to create a very grim look. So by including those darker shades, you can get into more dark themes and more serious themes. Whereas if you had just really bright yellows, then we'd have something that might look like a sunny day. In fact, something similar to this. So monochromatic is the most basic of the color relationships, but then we already saw some of these examples that have more than one color. They obviously have more than one color because we, even in the let's hope there's a heaven, even though the colors are very similar, we still see sort of pink going into yellow and orange as we go through the sunset. So that means there are other options. We can pair colors together to create these kind of impressions. And those are the complementary and analogous colors. Complementary colors, and I want to specifically point out this title, complementary, because sometimes we think of the word complementary with an I instead of an E, and that means it pairs well together. They support one another. But this word has a very specific meaning in color theory, and so when I look at your work, I'm going to be looking for you to use it in this context. Complementary colors are those that are directly opposite on the color wheel. So a true complementary pair would be like blue and orange, or red and green, yellow and purple, and also the secondary and tertiary colors. So say red, orange, and teal would be a complementary pair. I use the term complementary to refer to any two colors that are nearly opposites as well. So they don't have to be directly opposites. So if you had, say, blue and like a red, especially going into the red-orange, then it would still be a complementary relationship because you still have that strong contrast. And that's the important part, is that really strong, stark contrast that creates more of a dynamic energy. Analogous colors are those that are similar to one another. You think about the meaning of the word analogous. Means roughly the same. So these are very similar colors. So that would be like orange, red orange, and yellow orange. They're pretty close to the same color, but not quite the same color. Usually it's three colors that are adjacent to one another. And so they're very harmonious, they're very similar, but they give a little bit more color richness than what we have in monochromatic. And I will give a word of caution about this, and I see this sometimes. All the colors are adjacent to one another. So if you had every color on this half of the color wheel, yes, they are adjacent to one another, but you're getting into complementary color relationships at that point. So analogous colors, you really have to use judgment and think about, how closely they are related to one another. All three of the colors. So if one of the colors in the color palette is on the opposite side, then you're no longer dealing with an analogous color palette. Really, without even looking at the color wheel, you can just think, how similar are these colors to one another? How different are they? And that'll tell you whether it's complementary or analogous. So some analogous color schemes. Here we have a lot of violets and reds and some sort of magenta. Get little hints of blue in the sky and the water, and so it's getting a little farther out there, but really predominantly this is analogous warm colors, and this is the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. So it creates that very serene feel. And here's our example from Fine Arts. This is actually one of Claude Monet's paintings. I always forget to change that label, but you can see how it's pretty serene. It does not have a lot of conflict in the colors. They all are very harmonious. And from a movie, almost the same color scheme, right? So not a real strong energy. Here's an interesting anomaly, and this came from the exploration. It's the Hulk, and this is analogous colors, and this is blue and green. There's also some yellow in here, and that's in the highlights. But it's interesting to see in this case that they use these analogous colors for an action film, because that's not something we often see done, because it doesn't have that same exciting energy. They've used some really bright tints of green going into like a green yellow green, so you do get a little bit of highlights, but this almost feels more like something you would expect for maybe a horror film rather than an action adventure type film. Analogous warm colors can still get that energy that's true of warm colors. So the Mockingjay poster, as well as the other movies in this series, use this fire theme, and it goes through reds and oranges and yellows, and so it gives it that fiery energy. And just so I don't get too media specific, this applies across the board. Even in web design, this is analogous web design using blues and greens, and enough color difference to allow for some color coding of the navigation, but aside from this pencil that was thrown in just to throw me off, there's not a lot of color contrast. So that's analogous colors. Analogous colors are harmonious. They're very similar to one another. Not a lot of dramatic energy to be seen. As opposed to complementary colors. And this is probably the most iconic complementary color pairing is orange and blue. You'll see this used in many movie posters, and it allows for that strong warm versus cool conflict, so it gives you that sense of action. And here you can see what I was talking about with the warm colors popping forward, whereas the cool colors recede into the background. And a Vincent van Gogh painting, The Night Cafe, and you can see how the warm cafe pops into the foreground and becomes our center of focus, whereas the dark nighttime cityscape recedes into the back. This example was not from this month's exploration, it was from the previous month, but I liked it because of the comparison between these two posters. Both of them use complementary colors. This one uses more of a combination of green and violets, as well as some blue and gold to create that sense of excitement. It's a little darker with the space scenes. But look at the thematic similarities. This is off topic a little bit, but just you can see how it pays homage to the classic Star Wars poster, with the Star Wars poster using a lot of blue and orange. And this is an artist named Drew Struzan, did this Star Wars poster, as well as a lot of other iconic movie posters, Harry Potter, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, and he's really known for using that orange and blue combination. And more often than not, these are adventure films, and so having that exciting contrasts. is appropriate. I like this one because this is an interesting anomaly. Again, this is a complementary color scheme that's used in a context that's not high energy. It's actually pretty subdued. Um, there's orange and blue, but notice how they've done this is by desaturating the color. They really extracted all the vibrance out of it, and it created this more subdued, more kind of low energy level that goes along with the more serious tones of the film. And Amelie, of course, this is a less common complementary pair, but red and green does show up occasionally, and it has that same effect. See how that sets her apart from the background, gets her into the foreground, makes her focal point. Even the warm gold of the text still stands out. So by putting that cool green background, they've allowed the figure and the text to take the foreground, take the attention. That's something that's used often. This is another one from last month, and you can see how the green background lets this red jacket really just pop. And here's Harry Potter, really taking advantage of his red Gryffindor robes by putting that green background behind him, because he becomes our focal point. Whereas Draco Malfoy in his green Slytherin robe, even though he's in the foreground, blends in a little more, so he doesn't catch our attention as much. So really managing our point of view. And that's something that'll be important next week when we talk about visual hierarchy, because color contrast plays a part in that. And comparing this to the earlier web design we saw, now you see there's a lot more color contrast, so it's a little more high energy, a little more upbeat, and that corresponds with the more lighthearted approach of the website itself. The other one was more business-like. This one's really tongue-in-cheek. You can see with the imagery, the slogans, great websites, no lame marketing slogans, and so forth. So that personality is reflected in the fun colors that they've used. So those are the basic two, and if you remember those two, analogous and complementary, and you know what they mean, you'll do well. You'll be able to pick colors that will give you the visual impression and the personality that you're looking for. There's variations on that. Say if you have two warm colors paired with a cool color, then you're getting into more of a split complementary arrangement. So in this case, they've got the kind of red-orange and a little more of a flat orange paired with teal, so it has good contrast, but a little bit more color richness than just the straight complementary pair. Multiple complementary pairs start creating really vibrant and exciting looking scenes. This is tetradic, which means 4 colors, and it has 2 complementary pairs, so lots of rich color. And you can keep adding colors to it. It might get a little out of hand, so unless you're really going for a sensory, like a rich sensory experience, then you might want to back off a little bit, but there's nothing stopping you. Triadic, so this is the middle ground. We talked about when all the colors are on the same side of the color wheel, that's analogous. When they're opposites, they're complementary. What if they're equidistant? Well, that's triadic. So 3 colors from equally spaced locations on the color wheel. So it's very much the middle ground. It has a balance of contrast and harmony, so moderate visual energy, but a good variety of colors. Just more examples of the blue, red, yellow. So you can think about complementary colors would be a triadic group. The secondary colors and so forth, as you moved around, any 3 colors that are equally spaced would be a triadic color palette. And the last one, which I touched on, is achromatic. So black and white, again, are not considered colors. They are considered pure value. It's pure dark, pure white, and all the shades of gray in between. But you can use purely achromatic imagery, of course. It just has a different visual impression. It doesn't have the advantage of the energy that color contrast can provide, and so it tends to be a little lower in terms of energy. Can be very depressed, depending on how it's used. Not always. It can also be very elegant looking, but more often you see it used for very serious themes, like Batman. I think this is The Dark Knight Rises. So very gritty, very hard-edged themes here. Also James Bond, so very similar themes going on there. And so they use this very serious achromatic design. And I already mentioned that you can use an accent color to create a focal point or add some symbolic meaning. And this is a scene from Schindler's List where they've got the little girl, and I think this is the only time color appears in this movie, is the little girl in the red jacket. And so it calls our attention to her, and I think there's some symbolism in there, but I couldn't tell you exactly what that is. But point being that throwing that splash of color in there really allows you to highlight that object. We saw that here. This one I included because to make a point that it's sort of you get to where there's a fine line between monochromatic and accented achromatic. How much red should there be on the page before it's considered monochromatic red? I would probably lean more towards this being accented achromatic because it's black and white with an accent of red. But it's a fine line, and ultimately it doesn't matter because once you get to this point, the visual impression is as it is, whether you call it achromatic or monochromatic. And the red really starts to dominate. Okay, so last thing I want to touch on, and you're probably relieved to hear that because this is the longest of the lectures for this class, is branding. I want to get back to this, and I want to talk about your mood boards briefly. Brand colors become really iconic, really recognizable. These are some that you probably know, and notice that they still make use of these color relationships. There's the monochromatic Intel design, the analogous BP, the Lakers with gold and purple is more complementary, and split complementary with Firefox because you have yellows and oranges and blue. And triadic, same color scheme as we saw with Rosie the Riveter, red, yellow, blue for Burger King. Really iconic. Like nobody would ever not recognize the Burger King logo, right? You know it. It's pretty sticky. So when you're picking your brand colors, you want to think about not only what base color do I want to be associated with my brand. Like BP, the base color would be the green because that is where they start. But also, do I want to add additional colors in order to create a specific visual impression? So Firefox uses split complementary. It's very color rich, and it's also very exciting because it has that color contrast. So they wanted to get a more upbeat feel for their logo, whereas Intel is a little more businesslike. So that's something to think about because you are developing a visual representation of your personal brand with this mood board project. So think about what your personal brand feels like. What is its personality? And then start deciding on colors based on that. You don't necessarily want to pick your favorite colors. You can, but not just because they're your favorite colors. Think about not only what they mean to you, but what they mean to everyone else who's looking. Because they're who matters, really, because they're your audience. Every company, well, most, at least of any fair size, will have a style guide. And it's similar to what we're doing with the mood board, but where they establish the brand colors. This is the Full Sail colors. This is actually taken from the Full Sail logo style guide. I wasn't allowed to give the color codes, but I could show the colors themselves. But these are the official colors. The primary colors are that orange and this sort of ochre greenish hue, and you see those pretty recognizably used on the Full Sail business cards and stationery and so forth. There's also an additional color with this metallic gray, silverish gray. You don't see that as often, but it's used in some publications as well as events. If you go to graduation, you'll see a lot of that used as well. So these are codified. They're set down in writing, set in stone, so essentially, along with specific color codes so they can always be reproduced exactly the same. And this is a page from the course catalog. And what do you see? You see those colors used for the page itself. So you have something of a complementary relationship, allowing that orange title to stand out. And the other key feature is the page number, and that stands out. And you'll see this if you flip through the catalog. You'll notice that all of the headings are in orange. Other details are provided in the greenish color, kind of almost an olive green, so that branding is consistently maintained throughout. Even if you don't see the airplane logo, you know this is a Full Sail branded document. And so that's what you also want to think about with your personal brands or any other brands you're working on. The brand isn't just the logo. It is all of these factors. It is the colors, it is the personality, the tone of voice, and so on. And you want to keep that consistent. So put some thought into these colors and think about color relationships as well. You can go monochromatic and have a plain blue or what have you brand, but you can also think about the personality you want to convey, because that might call for more of a complementary or analogous colors. So that's all for tonight. If you have any questions, be sure to get in touch. Looking forward to seeing how your mood boards develop. Oh, and one other thing that I should have mentioned during the announcements. As you develop your week 2 project for your mood board, make corrections to the week 1 component. So update your week 1 page based on my feedback, because I will reevaluate them as I look at the week 2 material. And if you've made the corrections, I will adjust your grade for week 1 up to 10 points, depending on how successfully you correct the issues. So you have a chance to learn. My feeling is that a grade, an assignment should not be a one-time judgment and then we move on. You don't learn that way. So if you're able to see my feedback, see the issues that were in your work and correct them, you will learn from that experience more so than getting a one-time judgment and moving ahead. That's my personal approach to grading anyway. Others have different styles, and that's fine, but just take advantage of that, and let's see how we can develop these projects. I will speak with you all soon. I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.